there have been a series of riots, obviously, around the country, hijacked, if you will, the George Floyd death. There were peaceful protests in the black community to demand justice for George Floyd. They started on Friday. Antifa and others infiltrated those riots and led them to become violent. And what I find remarkable are the number of members of the media who leapt immediately to the idea that this is somehow white supremacist Trump supporters who were actually doing the rioting. It was nothing of the like, and yet they couldn't help themselves making that claim because they can't bring themselves to acknowledge that Antifa might actually be to blame. They did not want to do that. We're also seeing intelligence operatives around the world taking advantage of the situation, trying in some ways to infiltrate and use online systems to pass disinformation and magnify the disruption that's happening in the country. Here's Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor to the President.
Okay, and what can you tell us about any of the far-right groups that might be trying to use this as a predicate to prompt a race war, as Vice News reported that they are also part of some of the unrest, some of the violence we're seeing. And then, of course, Senator Rubio saying that foreign adversaries through social media are trying to stoke violence as well.
Well, I have not seen those reports, and I haven't read. I generally don't read Vice, so I haven't seen the reports on far-right groups. This is being driven by Antifa, and they did it in Seattle. They've done it in Portland. They've done it in Berkeley. This is a destructive force of radical. I don't even know if we want to call them leftists, whatever they are. They're militants who are coming in and burning our cities, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
And a little more.
Okay, and what can you tell us about any of the far-right groups that might be trying to use this
expansion of the conversation
as a predicate to prompt a race war, as Vice News reported that they are also part of some of the unrest, some of the violence we're seeing. And then, of course, Senator Rubio saying that foreign adversaries through social media are trying to stoke violence as well.
Well, I have not seen those reports, and I haven't read. I generally don't read Vice, so I haven't seen the reports on far-right groups. This is being driven by Antifa, and they did it in Seattle. They've done it in Portland. They've done it in Berkeley. This is a destructive force of radical. I don't even know if we want to call them leftists, whatever they are. They're militants who are coming in and burning our cities, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And as far as our foreign adversaries, look, we always have foreign adversaries who are on Twitter and Facebook and other places trying to sow discord among Americans. And, the difference between us and our foreign adversaries, and I want to send a message to the Chinese or whoever else are taking satisfaction of this. When we have an event like happened to George Floyd, which was just horrifying, and again, our hearts go out to his family. We mourn and grieve with him. We're going to investigate it. We're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to prosecute him. We're going to get to the bottom of what those other officers who were standing around while George Floyd was killed, what they were doing, and if necessary, they'll be prosecuted. And we're going to follow that very closely. That's the difference between us and our foreign adversaries. When this happens in America, those bad apples who give all of our law enforcement, who are great Americans, a bad name, they're going to be prosecuted. We're going to allow people to protest, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And that's the difference between us and between the authoritarian countries around the world.
He makes a good point there. China apparently is trying to stir stuff up online. Be careful what you read online. It was really galling to me to see the Democrats, particularly the activists in the news, rush out to say, oh, this is all Trump supporters doing this, which was nonsense and completely unsubstantiated. And yet they ran with it because they can't bring themselves to acknowledge precious Antifa might be behind this. Now, I realize that there are some of you who believe Antifa means anti-fascist, and therefore they're just against fascism. Actually, Antifa was started by communists to go against the Nazis. The Nazis and the communists are kissing cousins. And the fascists and the anti-fascists are kissing cousins. They use largely the same tactics. Antifa is a violent group in the same way the European fascists were. To say that it is somehow a peaceful organization against fascism is part of the propaganda. That's not true. It is a violent left-wing group. And you can see it across the country. But I want to spend a few moments, if you'll, well, you have to allow, because it's my show, talking about this. I thought it was notable over the weekend that it was overwhelmingly progressive white 20-somethings doing the damage It was these progressive 20-something skinny jean-clad hipsters with their Antifa face masks on who hijacked the peaceful protests of Black Americans seeking justice and instead led marauding gangs around to vandalize, pillage, and destroy. That should probably tell us all something about race and justice in the United States right now. There were certainly Black Americans engaged in the destruction. You saw the pictures of people, black and white, pulling TVs out. I saw one poor little white dude pulling Legos out of a Target. But in city after city after city, it was mostly young white people, mostly young white men who picked up the first bricks and lit the first fires. Now, I just meditate on this with me for just a minute, if you will. Think about this. It was not the initial aggressors, like, for example, in Atlanta. What began to trigger the event in Atlanta on Friday night, I was up in Atlanta. I was coming home. Ironically, I don't know if you know where the Corey Tower is in the Grady Curb in downtown Atlanta, the big white tower that's down there near the state capitol. My face was on it. I'd gone over to Corey Enterprises for lunch, and they had put up a picture of me and my show. And so I was, my face was staring down at the rioters as they stormed the interstate on Friday night. But the initial prompt was the bicycle police there. Some white guy tried to yank a bike away from one of the bike police officers, and that started the trouble, and it escalated from there. But think about this for a minute. These weren't white supremacists. They were mostly the black-clad thugs of Antifa and a bunch of teen and 20-somethings who've been cooped up for a couple of months and no longer have jobs, idle hands with time on their hands. They decided to go out and do this. So let's not deny that there were black people involved in the destruction. You've seen the pictures. But I think it's also notable that these young hipster white kids are far less likely to face any consequence than the young black people who were engaged in rioting and violence. And that's kind of the problem we're dealing with. You remember Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri? Michael Brown stole stuff from a convenience store. He then charged and assaulted a cop. The police officer ultimately had to shoot him, justifiably so, for what he did. Well, compare him with Dylan Roof, who went into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and killed a bunch of people, shot the place up. And then the police bought him Burger King afterwards. Did you know that? He was hungry. They bought him Burger King. They didn't shoot and kill him. I was listening to Leonce Crump, who's a Reform pastor in Atlanta, went to Reformed Theological Seminary, great guy, well-spoken, and he pointed out, it's not that these young black men got killed by the police when they were charging or trying to assault the police. It's that for every one of those, you can find one where a white guy did the same thing and they led him away in handcuffs. There are plenty of white people who are killed by police every year due to police brutality. There are. But also black. And maybe we do have a problem with police. I saw and by the way, this is not to paint a broad brush with the police. I saw someone over the weekend say, we always say a few bad apples spoil the bunch when it comes to the police. We would never say that about brain surgeons or doctors in general or pilots. We don't want a few bad apples in those professions. Why do we allow them into the police? Part of the problem we deal with is this notion of white privilege, which I am opposed to the whole idea. It is a social construct from the left, and they use it a lot. And I got to tell you, I don't feel very privileged. I'm still paying off loans from law school. I funded my entire law school ride with student loans. I'm still paying them off. I don't even practice law anymore. I busted my butt to get where I am. I certainly don't feel privileged. That's not privilege. It's hard work. It's sweat equity. I find the entire idea of white privilege, what you're trying to tell me is that an entire class of people, you don't want to be judged as a class of people, but you want to judge a class of people. You want to say all white people are somehow culpable. Man, I've seen friends of mine who are white in the last few days saying, I guess I am partly responsible. I guess I am to blame. I've played some role in this. You haven't played a role in this. There's no, this whole white privilege idea, it is designed to make you feel guilty for something that is not your fault. If we are a society composed of individuals, then we should all be treated as individuals. Everybody's story is unique. The poor white kid in Appalachia, depending on a government van to come by today and give him lunch, does not have white privilege. And when he elevates himself out of Appalachia by getting an education in a crumbling school in spite of the school system, and goes off to college and becomes a lawyer, there's no white privilege there. If we're not to judge anybody by their skin, then we're not to judge anybody by their skin. So I vehemently reject the idea of white privilege. But we can't reject reality. And the reality is that both white and black people are abused by police on occasion. But few white parents ever have to actually talk to their kids about the police. When white parents give their kids the talk is about how not to make their white parents grandparents before they're ready. When black parents give the talk to their kids, the talk is how not to get shot by the police so that maybe they'll live long enough to give their parents kids. And that is a reality. We can't deny that reality. I can't tell you the extraordinary conversations I have had with friends of mine in the black community who say this, who tell me that they got to talk to their kids about what to do with an encounter with police. So there's no white privilege. I'm not going to be guilted into going along with left-wing values. I'm not going to be guilted into going along with reparations or some such. And by the way, you notice it's always white liberals. I'm sure the woman in New York who wanted to call the cops and say a black man was harassing her, I bet she was in favor of reparations. A bunch of white liberals want to throw money at the problem and walk away. Next time police brutality happens, well, we gave you money. The reality is we got a problem. Racism is a sin. We are all sinners. There is a problem with some sinners, and that problem is racism. And those people are involved in government, and they're involved in society. And that is the reality. Whether it's George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, we still fall short, but we don't need red pills. We don't need blue pills. Frankly, we don't need pills. We need Jesus. Red or blue, we just need Jesus. I'm frustrated because it would be great if the president could address the nation, but what good could he do? He is divisive. He likes to fight, and there will be people, you'll have the Don Lemons of the world, if the president were to say anything nice, would melt down and come unhinged because the president dared to offer an olive branch. How dare you offer the olive branch unless you give me the litany of all the things that I've wanted all along that you haven't given me? So the president can't address the nation. The media is dividing the nation. I mean, hell, the media is out there saying it was white supremacists doing this when it was Antifa out there writing Antifa symbols and spray painting hammers and sickles on things. But we do need to stop throwing up excuses, and we do need to recognize that there are problems. You know, black churches and white churches, they all worship the same God from the same Bible, but they emphasize different syllables of faith. Black churches are way more likely to focus on the Exodus. Black Americans, white Americans, we all say the same Pledge of Allegiance, but we put the emphasis on different parts of our shared story as a nation. And frankly, we do need to acknowledge that the United States has been far less kind to the story of Black America than white America. And a government and a society has turned a blind eye to solutions. But here's the problem. A society where a white kid can pick up a brick and smash the window at a Target and face less repercussions than a black kid is a society that's not going to come up with a solution to the problem. So many of the proposed solutions from the left are just the government rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic or throwing money at the problem. So that's white liberals love to throw money at problems and never deal with them again. Frankly, the solution here, everybody wants a solution. The solution's going to come from you and from me. It's going to come from you loving your neighbor. It's going to come from you teaching your kids to understand that different Americans have different experiences, and we should judge that person by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. You know, there's this big movement after Ahmaud Arbery that we're never going to have a colorblind society. What we need to do is to come to terms with this. No. Jesus says there's neither Jew nor Greek nor male nor female nor slave nor free. I think we're supposed to have a society where we don't see our differences. We see each other as a shared people. But that's the thing here. You're going to start hearing a whole bunch of people saying we need government solutions to this. Government's got to do something. There are some things the government can do, and we can talk about those, but there really aren't a lot of things the government can do here, because essentially the government that runs the law enforcement that killed George Floyd is the government you want a solution from. We're not going to get solutions from those people. And by the way, I think we should resist the blame game. We should resist the idea that we're culpable because we're white, we're privileged in some way. We need to recognize the reality of what goes on in this country, that Black Americans, by and large, do tend to have worse encounters with law enforcement and worse outcomes overall. We do need to recognize that. What can we as individuals do to improve that situation? But we can resist the whole blame game, white privilege stuff, acknowledge the reality of unfairness, and also recognize government's not going to provide a solution to this. We've had a bunch of well-meaning liberals in the government bureaucracy for decades, and the situation isn't getting any better. It's going to require you around the table with your kids discussing this, not government trying to find a solution.
I really do